rule of law. Working across the whole of government, we will look at access to international protection and refugee resettlement and rethinking asylum processing to ensure fair and faster consideration. Only by addressing those root causes can we break the cycle of desperation and provide hope for families who clearly would prefer to stay in their countries and provide a better future for their children. President Biden, when he was vice president, visited the region many times and is clear-eyed about the challenge. He insists now, as he did then, that governments commit to being true partners in creating the conditions for growth and security. But I want to emphasize that the funds we're asking for from Congress don't go to government leaders. They go to communities, to training, to climate mitigation, to violence prevention, to anti-gang programs. In other words, they go to the people who otherwise migrate in search of hope. And they will have to have the participation of the private sectors in those countries, who for too long have evaded taxes, underpaid workers, and failed to be part of the solution to creating safe, prosperous, and democratic countries. We've already begun specific actions to both undo the previous administration's policies and to advance a new vision of immigration. We have ended the so-called migrant protection protocols, which sent people back to Mexico to wait, sometimes for years, for a chance to present their asylum claims. Working with the government of Mexico, international organizations, and NGOs, we have safely admitted over 1,400 migrants and closed the most dangerous face of the MPP, the Matamoros migrant camp. Today, we are announcing the restarting of the Central American Minors Program for children to be reunited with a parent who is legally in the United States. This program was ended abruptly by the previous administration, leaving around 3,000 children already approved for travel stranded. In phase 2, we will be working to improve the CAM program to expand safe and legal avenues to the United States. I want to be clear, neither this announcement nor any of the other measures suggest that anyone, especially children and families with young children, should make the dangerous trip to try and enter the U.S. in an irregular fashion. The border is not open. Going forward, we will continue to look for ways to provide legal avenues in the region for people needing protection while we continue to enforce our laws. This is a process. We have a great deal to do, but this administration has made significant progress, and we will continue to do so. It reflects who we are as Americans, putting our values at the center of our policy. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you for doing this, Roberta. This $4 billion that the administration is seeking, are you seeking this as part of a larger comprehensive immigration package or as a standalone bill?
Well, I think what you'll see is that $4 billion in a Central American Northern Triangle strategy will be part of our foreign assistance request and will focus on the things we know that work. Obviously, it's not our first rodeo. The president, when he was vice president, worked on these issues. We know how to get money to communities that are most likely to send migrants, but also that are suffering the greatest effect of 2 hurricanes this season, et cetera. So it will be part of our overall foreign assistance package. In the meantime, we are focused on getting humanitarian assistance to these countries after Hurricanes Eta and Iota. So in that sense, it's part of a larger plan. But obviously, there are parts of this that will be on the domestic side as well to fix the whole extent of our immigration processing.
And what else is the administration doing right now to work with these home countries to send a message to people, don't come here, don't send your children here?
Right. Well, I think, one of the most important things is to make sure that we get communications right and the message right, and I'm happy to repeat that. But I think it's also important that we work with the international organizations that have very credible voices and have very good networks among migrant sending communities to dispel the myths and misinformation that smugglers are using, right? When we talk about the border not being open, and the ways in which we're trying to dissuade people from making that dangerous journeys, the smugglers are conveying exactly the opposite to people. So we need to make sure we get that message out. We also need to be looking at things like the CAM program, the Central American Minors Program, as I talked about, and how we can expand that, how we can make that, eligibility greater. But the next step is to look at solutions in the region, right? What more can we do to process people legally who really do require protection so they don't have to make that journey? And we're looking at all of those things.
And finally, you said that this isn't your first rodeo. Should the administration have been better prepared to handle this influx of children before it changed the policy allowing them to stay in the country?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think what we're doing right now is making a difference in the home countries, beginning to work with governments. That couldn't start until January 20th. There is one government at a time. You can't start changing processes of government, building facilities. All of this is part of the plan as quickly as possible to make sure that our domestic processes work more smoothly, more quickly, as I mentioned, but also to work with foreign governments. And you can't do that, obviously, till January 20th when you take over. But there have been multiple engagements with the government of Mexico at very high level, with the government of Guatemala, with the Honduran government and Salvadoran in the first, 6 weeks of government. So I think we've gotten off to a big start, a fast start in that engagement.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Jen and Madam Ambassador. On Honduras, how does the administration balance this need for cooperation from that government with ongoing concerns about corruption there, particularly federal prosecutors who say that the President Hernandez was working on his plan to flood the United States with cocaine?
Well, I think one of the things that I made clear in the opening comments, which I want to reiterate, is that none of the money that we're looking to get from Congress, from the taxpayers of the United States, goes to government leaders. And so I don't think that means that presidents are unimportant in these countries, but I do think that it's important to understand that we will be working with civil society, with international organizations and international NGOs on the ground. We will work with officials that we can work with, but we also think it's really important that these countries make commitments, really explicit commitments, to advancing on anti-corruption. And in some places that will be hard to do if you've got officials for whom there is a cloud. And I think we need to work with the organizations that we can in countries. In some places, we will work with religious organizations, NGOs, with et cetera. It's a challenge in countries that have confronted serious corruption risks.
Just one follow-up, what mechanism is in place, or how do you possibly safeguard that funding to make sure it stays out of the hands, perhaps, corrupt politicians?
Well, I think one of the things that we've always done, and 31 years of the State Department has taught me this, is we do end-use monitoring, right? Our embassies and people that we work with are looked at before they're recipients of funds, and we do checks and we look at what's being done with the funds, right? We also don't deliver money in most cases. We deliver training. We deliver new lighting facilities that reduce violence and crime. So a lot of what you do, it's not handing over blank checks, and I think that's really important in this.
Kayla?
Thank you very much. You were talking about restarting CAM, these other long-term goals for what the immigration policy should look like, but right now, new CNN reporting shows that unaccompanied migrant children are being held in these Border Patrol facilities for, on average, 107 hours. That's up from, I believe, 77 hours on average last week. So what is the Biden administration doing right now to fix that?
Well, I think, my part of this focuses much more on what we're doing at the end of this process in Central America and Mexico. I think all of us at every stage of this process are doing everything we can to make sure that children are well cared for and moved into facilities that are appropriate for them. But I want to make a point again that it's really important that people not make the dangerous journey in the first place, that we provide them with alternatives to making that journey because it's not safe en route. And so, if I could just emphasize that, that it's really important that that message get out, because the perception is not the same as the reality in terms of the border not being open. But we want to provide through CAM, through other mechanisms, ways for some of these young people to be reunited with family members in the United States. Así que yo creo que es muy importante subrayar el caso que...
We're going to take a quick 2-minute break here on News Now from Fox.
irregular ahora.
You're telling them not to come, just to follow up quickly, you're telling them they should not come. Would you describe what's happening on the border as a crisis, given how these numbers are spiking so much week by week?
You know, I think I'm not trying to be cute here, but I think the fact of the matter is we have to do what we do regardless of what anybody calls the situation. And the fact is we are all focused on improving the situation, on changing to a more humane and efficient system. And whatever you call it wouldn't change what we're doing, because we have urgency from the president on down to fix our system and make sure that we are better at dealing with the hopes and the dreams of these migrants in their home country.
Madam Ambassador, do you think it's a coincidence that as soon as Trump and his immigration policy were on the way out and Biden and his stated policy were on the way in, this historic surge at the border started?
Well, first of all, one of the things I think is important is we've seen surges before. Surges tend to respond to hope. And there was a significant hope for a more humane policy after 4 years of pent-up demand. So I don't know whether I would call that a coincidence, but I certainly think that the idea that a more humane policy would be in place may have driven people to make that decision. But perhaps more importantly, it definitely drove smugglers to express disinformation, to spread disinformation about what was now possible.
And
we know that.
If the change in administration's brought hope, then from your perspective, is this surge good?
I don't think that's what I just said. I think it's a reflection of how migrants feel at a particular time. I think what we are doing is making sure that we respond to that hope for people who need protection. We respond to that hope in a way that their cases can be adjudicated more quickly. But I don't think anybody would say that coming to the United States in an irregular fashion is a good thing. That's why I've tried repeatedly to dissuade people from listening to those smugglers. But we're going to try our best to do everything we can at each end of this in the United States, but especially in Central America and Mexico, to ensure we have safe, orderly, and legal migration.
Go ahead. President Biden, when he was vice president, was very active on working with the Northern Triangle countries. And I was just wondering, were there lessons that you or he or other administration officials, many of whom are in jobs in this administration, have learned about how to deal with those countries or how to deal with foreign aid to them that are informing how you're approaching things now? And just to kind of follow up a little bit on what Peter was asking, are you concerned at all about kind of mixed messaging, that at the same time that you are telling people not to come, that the journey is dangerous, that because you are offering this talk about a more humanitarian process, that people will not, pay attention to the fact that they could apply from their home country, that they will still come, that they are still, so hopeful, that there really is kind of a conflicting message coming from Washington to Central America?
So on the first question, the question of learning things from when the vice president was leading a lot of our efforts in Central America previously, I think yes. That's a resounding yes. Both the president and all of us who worked with him on that, for him on that, learned a great deal. And I think that it's really important that we put that to use now. One of the things he thinks is so important is being really explicit with leadership in the countries from which migrants are coming about commitments that they need to make, because overcoming the reasons people migrate is not going to be the United States' job alone, right? If we realize that it's lack of good governance, economic opportunity, and security issues or violence, then some of those require commitments by the governments on anti-corruption and transparency, on creating governments that function better to provide services for their country. So he's very clear on being sure that we get those commitments from leaders and holding them to it, right? The money is not a tap that gets turned on all at once. You have to make sure that you're continuing to follow those issues. So I think there's a lot of things we learned, and a lot of things we learned about ensuring that funds get to the communities that are really in need, whether it's post-hurricane or coffee rust, which was ravaging Guatemala and Honduras, or, you know, a historic drought. I think when you look at the issue of mixed messages, it is difficult at times to convey both hope in the future and the danger that is now. And that is what we're trying to do. And I will certainly agree that we are trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. We are trying to convey to everybody in the region that we will have legal processes for people in the future, and we're standing those up as soon as we can. But at the same time, you cannot come through irregular means. It's dangerous, and, you know, the majority of people will be sent out of the United States, because that is the truth of it. We want to be honest with people. And so we are trying to send both messages, and smugglers are only trying to send one message. So we're relying on every means we can to get that message out there. And that leads me to want to reiterate, as I did before, que la frontera está cerrada. Y no es el momento, ningún momento es apropiada de llegar a los